Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the direct route to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where you are on the fast track to the PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. I've said this before. The PMP exam is an experience-based exam, and yes, there'll be some questions that do in fact test your memory, but most of them will be situational, and this is where you have to apply your experience to the question, but still answer them from the PMBOK guide's point of view. In this lesson, we look at how to apply the concept of project monitoring from the PMBOK guide into the real world. Monitoring and evaluation has been used by non-governmental organizations for evaluating programs for decades. For the European Union, the United Nations, the World Bank and other development banks, it is embedded in their organizational processes. Many have even published toolkits to promote understanding and adoption. For projects, processes for monitoring progress are far less established. Therefore, it is of little surprise that the quality of those monitoring processes, well, it can vary widely. For projects, quality means at a minimum timeliness, relevance, reliability, accuracy, usability, and credibility. Unless monitoring processes demonstrate these characteristics, they are unlikely to improve performance and enhance accountability. Our interview guest, Joy Gums from Project Auditors, has been working in the field of project auditing and project monitoring for quite some time. She wrote a paper titled, "Why Use a Hammer When You Need a Wrench? Results-Based Monitoring and Evaluation of Projects," which she presented at a PMI Global Congress in Budapest. In this lesson, we discuss her findings. The discussion will present to you some of the latest findings in project monitoring as you prepare for the PMP exam. And since PMI always adds new questions to the exam, this could be a future area of focus. Let's learn a little bit about our guest and then go into the interview. Joy Gums is a PMP and Senior Director of Project Auditors, a project management consulting, training and auditing company. They have provided project management services to Global 2000 corporations, the US federal and the Canadian national government, and to non-profit organizations such as the United Nations. Prior to working with Project Auditors, Joy worked for PeopleSoft. With her expertise in ERP and cost systems, she has consulted to clients in Germany, Switzerland, Italy, the UK, and the Middle East. She has led a project in Europe that successfully implemented PeopleSoft at a global pharmaceutical company in record time and has performed project audits at major companies and for the United Nations. Joy also taught project management and auditing courses at major companies and at universities like the University of California, California State University, and the American University of Sharjah. She is the first female instructor to teach at the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company in the United Arab Emirates. She has also published numerous papers in project management and is an international speaker. This interview with Joy was first published as part of our free project management podcast, and during the interview we discuss her presentation. If you would like to get this document so that you can take a look at it as well, then please look at episode 75 of the free project management podcast. For this, you have to go to pm-podcast.com, look for episode 75, and download the presentation. Hello, Joy, and welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you today.
Well, we're glad to have you, trust me. At this year's EMEA PMI Global Congress in Budapest, you have been asked to present a paper, and this paper was titled, "Why Use a Hammer when you need a wrench. Result-based monitoring and evaluation of projects. That's quite a mouthful. How was the paper received?
Very well. There were excellent questions at the end of the presentation. And I met several people later during the conference who said they enjoyed the session and the way it was presented. I try and use a lot of pictures and graphs, which is a little bit hard on the podcast. But I understand my presentation will be available on your site.
Exactly. Yes, the presentation is going to be available, so everyone who's downloading the podcast automatically via iTunes, they will get the presentation directly delivered to them. And those who click to play, you will have to go to the website where you'll find the link to the presentation from Joy Gums here. So tell me, how many people attended the presentation?
Well, I didn't do an actual head count, but the room held 200 people. And the room was about 2/3 full.
That's nice. So about 150, something like that?
Yes, I think
that's
about
a nice
150.
Turnout
yes.
For a global congress. Very nice. And how did you like Budapest, of course?
Oh, I love the city. The Intercontinental where we stayed was right on the Danube River, and the views were incredible in the evening. From Gellert Hill, you could see the Hungarian Statue of Liberty, and all the bridges are lit. It's really a very, very beautiful city.
Nice. That gives me a total different picture than my wife's picture, because she had a dreadful time in Budapest when she was there years ago. Now, before we go into your actual findings of your paper, you decided to examine project monitoring from 3 sectors. There was the government, there were the NGO, the non-governmental organizations, and also you looked at construction. What would be the major differences between those 3 sectors when it comes to actually monitoring a project?
Well, in construction, it's been used for a long time. Project monitoring used to be built into the process. The architect would work to ensure the general contractor delivered the intended structure. They would monitor the progress, do on-site visits. Architects are licensed, and they have a professional responsibility to take due care. So when the contracts were structured appropriately, this worked well. But in the litigious society we're in, that's all changed. And the change is worldwide. When I was in the United Arab Emirates earlier this year, one of my students confirmed this. When a large skyscraper under construction in Dubai burned, it was impossible to reach any of the architects. To avoid being contacted, they were all driving around with their cell phones turned off. Now, as far as the government sector, there have been some attempts to use project monitoring, but it's on an ad hoc basis, and it really hasn't always been successful. My research indicates this is due in part to this poor structuring of responsibilities. As far as NGOs, project monitoring has been built into their process. They've learned that to get donations and funding, this is critical for their success.
So if I hear you right, that means that all of these sectors do their project monitoring in a certain way. Is there anything that all 3 of them do the same way?
All of the sectors need to issue reports when they're monitoring projects. That would probably be the one similarity. But exactly what they're doing and how they verify what's going on the project could vary substantially.
Why do we need project monitoring at all? I mean, if I listen around, many companies, their projects are going on, they survive without project monitoring. So why the need for project monitoring?
The simple fact is all projects are not successful. The project manager should be in a position to realize this, but may not raise a red flag at the right time. And this can be due to a variety of reasons. But with projects getting bigger and the size increasing, it becomes essential as a form of governance to monitor projects.
Was there any particular reason for you to go into this particular topic and write a paper about it? Was there anything that really got your attention and, this is great?
Definitely. There were 2 things that got my attention. One was there's a large number of PeopleSoft and ERP projects going on that take up tens of millions of dollars, and these projects are not always successful. And the other one was the Deepwater project, which the U.S. Coast Guard started several years ago. It's a $24 billion project, and they've wasted at least $100 million cutting 8 ships apart that have to be scrapped. It was just on 60 Minutes last Sunday.
Okay. So there's a lot of money that could be gained or saved if monitoring would be done correctly, right?
I believe that that's the case. There certainly is a lot of money going into projects. Over 25% of the world GDP goes into projects. And clearly not all of these projects are successful.
So why then don't these government organizations and why don't they use project monitoring? Is there some sort of an aversion against it? I don't really want to know where my project is, or what's it all about?
Some government organizations have tried to use monitoring, but it's not been successful because the contract isn't structured as it should be. The responsibilities aren't clear. Mm-hmm. Other entities think that they've already bought the services and the project should simply happen the way they think it should happen. When so much money is at stake, it makes good sense to check on a project and see how it's doing, rather than waiting until the end of the project and finding out you have not succeeded in your goals.
Yeah. I remember one of my first employers, a paper mill of Biberist in Switzerland. They had this huge construction going on. Now, this is from memory. I'm not 100% sure if this is true, but they built these storage houses, and they were only a small portion of the complete project. But because the construction was so miserably done, the money they lost tipped the project, and the company got into real financial dire straits. And in your paper, you have listed, I think it was 6 or 8 projects that were similar, right? That had real problems.
Yes, exactly. There was a stadium that was built in Scotland that was over budget, and this was a publicly funded stadium, and the tax revenues were simply not there. There was also a very, very large project in the UK that was termed the shoddiest ever, where they spent hundreds of millions of pounds. Now, when the UK government calls it a shoddy project, it has to be pretty poorly done. And then, of course, the US Coast Guard has spent tens of millions of dollars that they've then thrown away.
Yeah, on their ships, right? Yeah.
And then the state of Florida has a project that actually it just canceled for PeopleSoft Financials, and that was an $82 million project.
Wow. Okay. Really, a lot of money is at stake here. Let me read something to you, because one paragraph in your paper, that one really got my attention. So let me read it to you, and then maybe you could elaborate on this one. Usually, project managers manage projects. When their role changes due to outsourcing or a move from the private sector to a government agency or an NGO, they may not be comfortable. The role and responsibilities for monitoring and evaluating projects is quite different from managing the projects themselves. The project manager needs to understand the differences between managing a project, monitoring, and evaluating it. So what are the differences?
Well, they're really different skill sets. Managing a project involves a great deal of communication, leadership, motivation. Monitoring is much more observation and influence. It's setting up a collaborative environment so you can help make the project successful, but not getting in the project manager's way. Mm-hmm. You have to collaborate. Evaluating a project is a time-bound based activity, so you're in a time crunch usually. It can involve interviews and reviewing large amounts of documentation. You need to produce very quickly an unbiased, objective report in what is often a very, very short amount of time. Plus, it's usually done by a team, and so the teamwork is very important.
Let me take a quick step back here, because in your bio, you are part of Project Auditors, LLC, and do you also do project monitoring, or do you just do project auditing?
We actually have done some of both.
Okay.
We have audited projects, such as at the United Nations in Rome. And then we've also monitored projects, which I did for a large wholesale firm, which is headquartered out in the East Coast.
Which do you prefer, monitoring or auditing?
I actually prefer probably auditing a little bit more than monitoring, because you're in and out.
Okay.
And
it's a shorter
stint, assignment,
right? Yeah, okay.
And you can deliver the results. The monitoring, it's a longer commitment of time. You're there on and off for the duration of the project.
Okay. let's now take a look at the approaches and the tools which are available for project management. For project monitoring, of course. So what monitoring approaches do we have, and why would a particular company use them?
Well, for monitoring, the paper talks about results-based monitoring,
Yes.
which is one thing I definitely want to talk about. It's much more of a collaborative environment where the monitor would sit down, say, with the project manager at the initiation of the project and talk about what types of things the project has as its goals and purposes, and then to define how those will be manifested throughout the project. For example, let's think about an enterprise software project where you're going to have everyone working together as opposed to people working in silos. For that project, then, communications between and among the stakeholders is critical. So you'll want to find out the pulse of the stakeholders and periodically find out, how do they feel about the project? Is communications good? Are they working well together? Stakeholders willing to give and take depending upon what they see in the project for the overall benefit of the corporation. So you might want to set up, say, some kind of a survey or poll and periodically check on the pulse. And the monitor would do this because they're independent. People should be able to talk to the monitor without fear that they would have their confidence divulged. And that way you would get a much better feel, perhaps, because the project manager might not get that direct an approach from stakeholders.
If I hear you right, you were talking about soft items on the project. So you're not only monitoring the hard facts, like we've spent $6 trillion and cut up one boat, but you're also monitoring the soft facts. This is how I feel. This is how I think the project is going.
Exactly. The soft factors are often very, very important in a project because the stakeholders sometimes know and they can feel whether it's going well. The project manager, of course, wants it to go well and tends to be very optimistic, which is good. But nonetheless, if there's an undercurrent where things aren't going well, best to have it addressed sooner rather than later.
What about tools? What kind of tools would you employ for project monitoring?
Probably the most important tool, especially for results-based monitoring, is called a logical framework. And this is really just a form that helps you think through how you get objective and verifiable means of success.
Right. I'm looking through your presentation right now. And if I counted right, this is slide number 17, I believe. The logical framework tool, right?
Exactly. So on here you can see you've got your goals and your purpose. But then how are you going to select the indicators that would indicate that this is going well? For example, your stakeholder pulse could be an indicator. Mm-hmm. Now, you might have other harder indicators too, such as the deliverables.
Yes.
And whether they were well received.
Done and
exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
Like oh, so you go from left to right. You define a goal, then you say, what indicator do I have to prove that this goal is on target? Then you go and you say, okay, what type of means of verifications do I have?
Yes, you actually move from the bottom up.
Oh, you move from the bottom up.
Yes.
Okay.
You look at the inputs first.
I see.
And you say, okay, what can I check on as a means of verification and the indicators? And then I look at the activities, and I look at the activities that I'm performing, and then I look at how those outputs of the activities. So, for example, I could even do a pulse of how the stakeholders feel about the deliverables they're receiving. If they feel the deliverables are too large, difficult to read, not understandable, maybe those deliverables are not really what we need to have to achieve our goals and our purpose.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm just, visualizing our listeners right here, the gentleman sitting in his car, going down the highway, wondering, what tool are they talking about? So to understand this, you really have to take a look at the presentation from Joy, slide number 17. The tool is called Logical Framework. And when you see it, it starts making sense. And go bottom up, which is what I didn't do. I went top down. So you have to go bottom up.
And another important tool is standards that have been put out by a Swiss evaluation society.
Yes, I read that in your paper. I was very proud of my fellow compatriots.
Yes, since Cornelius is from Switzerland, that's always a wonderful thing to see what your fellow countrymen have done. It's a very, very good set of standards. It's very easy to read, very applicable, and it's really divided up into a few parts. It sets the standards for an evaluation and how it should have utility. It should be useful to the people who are going to use it. It should be accurate, of course. It should be conducted in a realistic and diplomatic and cost-conscious manner. So the standards are only about 20 pages in total.
Okay.
Very, very reasonable. It's available at www.seval.ch, but I would just search on Google Swiss Evaluation Society.
Okay.
And that would put you on the English version. There's French and German versions of the site as well.
Yeah, while we're talking about tools, I'm looking at the presentation, of course, and I flipped one page, and there's another tool, reporting schedule. Is that pretty much your communications plan from a project monitoring point of view?
It's exactly that,
Okay.
Cornelius. You want to make sure that the people who are going to be informed on the monitoring know exactly when you're going to be reporting and what's going to be in that report as a high-level description.
So it not only contains when are you reporting, but also what are you reporting on, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Would there be hard factors or soft factors? And then, who is responsible for that? Probably the monitor, but it could be in conjunction with other people on the project.
There has to be input to these reports that he gives. Okay, so much for the tools. In your paper, you suggested a 9-step approach to building a project monitoring system. Now, we don't want to go through all the 9 steps in detail, but let's do a brief overview. Why don't you tell us those 9 steps that you've outlined sort of just as an overview? And then we actually want to look at a project that you've suggested and see how that's going on that project there.
Okay, so the first thing you want to do is conduct an inventory. You want to see what your organization is currently doing because, of course, as we all know, organizations tend to continue what they're doing, status quo. And so if there's anything in place for monitoring projects, you want to know about that. The second thing is agree on what you're going to monitor. What are the verifiable indicators? This is where you would sit down with the project manager and say, okay, how do we tell what success looks like? How will I know it when I see it? The third thing would be you'd gather some baseline data to see how things are going. If you're in the project initially, that would be your baseline data, but maybe the project's already started. So the sooner you gather the baseline data and find out where you're at, the better on those verifiable indicators. And then you want to build the monitoring system. That would be number 4. In other words, many of these things have to be done periodically, and it could be every month that you would do it or every 2 months. To gather data from various entities could take some time, and so you want to build that system. And then 5th, you'd want to then continue to do that throughout the project. Many of these projects that we've discussed are not just a few months. They're year, 5-year, some, like the Coast Guard project, are over 10 years in length. So you have to discuss how you're going to do this over time. And then, of course, you want to analyze and report on the information, which is number 6. Number 7 would be you would want to verify the quality of the information. In other words, how do you make sure that you're reporting exactly what the people need and that it's clear, that it's timely, that it's useful to them? If you're just reporting for the sake of reporting, there's no point in that. You want to make sure that people are using the data would be number 8, because even though it's helpful and timely and beneficial, they still may elect not to use it. Again, if they're not using it, there's no point in it. And then lastly, you want to look at your own process and see, is there anything you should be doing to improve on it? You want to reflect on how you're doing. And this is something that in the audit business, you always try and do continuous improvement. This last step is the continuous improvement piece. And that's really it.
Yeah, and frankly, it doesn't sound like rocket science.
It's definitely not rocket science.
No.
It's good project management.
Yes. Now, how does this look like when you apply it or not apply it in a project?
That's an excellent question. The Technology Review Workgroup for the Florida State Legislature was monitoring a PeopleSoft project that started in 2002 and actually kicked off in 2003. The project was just canceled in 2006, and in 2007, May 17th, it was ultimately canceled.
And how did they employ project monitoring on the project?
The difficulty with the project monitoring, as it's often done, is it's not hands-on enough. Mm-hmm. It's looking at reports, it's looking at, it's attending meetings, but it doesn't go deep enough, and many of the people are not as well-versed in project management as they could be. So next week, I'm going down to teach a course to the Technology Review Workgroup on project monitoring and auditing.
You bringing your paper and you're going to show them your paper?
Possibly.
Okay, so what were the mistakes that were made on the project? And how did it come out during monitoring? Do you have any insight into that?
I'll probably know more after I actually go down and visit with the people in Florida.
Okay. Much of what we have spoken about so far, that applies to large projects, to multi-year projects like you've mentioned. Many of our listeners here, however, they're like me. They manage small project, medium-sized project, maybe occasionally a project that is a little bit bigger. What can we do? What would you say we small project managers should be doing in order to monitor our projects?
Probably think more on the soft factors. Okay. To think more about your, say, stakeholder communications, about that pulse that we talked about. If you don't have a monitor, maybe set up one of your people to check on those kinds of things periodically, because that's really going to tell you maybe more than some of the deliverables or the other hard factors that you might otherwise consider. If you do have a project monitor assigned to your project, definitely work with them collaboratively. Don't think of them as a confrontational person. You want to work with them and learn as much as possible so that your project can be successful, because the monitor definitely wants a successful project.
Yeah.
Just as much as the project manager does.
I believe the project monitor's job is not to prove that the project is going wrong. The project monitor's job should be to indicate that there's a problem here, let's correct it now so that it doesn't lead to a failed project, right?
Exactly. In other words, it's to point out the areas of concern more quickly so that they can be addressed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate that you came by.
It was a pleasure to be with you.